Please be seated. It starts in a garden. It's a garden across the Kidron Valley where Jesus and his disciples have gathered many times, which means it's a garden that Judas knows about. It's a garden that's the beginning of the end for Jesus. The story moves fast from here. Lanterns, torches, dialogue, swords, ears. Jesus being taken to Annas, Caiaphas, Pilate. Peter warming himself by the fire while chillingly betraying his friend. Soldiers, crowns, thorns, then Golgotha, the skull, the cross. In 2 breathtaking chapters, we go from the garden to the tomb. It's a story that calls for silence and sadness, solemnity and strict altars. But in John's hands, it is also a story about glory. In John's Gospel, Jesus' lifting up on the cross is also his exaltation. Just before the sprint from the garden to the grave, John tells us Jesus prayed this: Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, so that your Son may glorify you. John's Gospel begins with the glory of the Word. He says, and the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son. The glory of the enfleshed Word is the glory that now radiates from the exalted Jesus on the cross. John leaves out most of what makes the Passion terrifying in the other Gospels. Jesus doesn't pray that this cup would pass from him. He is not distressed, sorrowful, or troubled. He certainly does not sweat blood. He is not mocked by the bystanders as he hangs on the cross. The sun is not darkened. The curtain of the temple is not torn. There is no earthquake. Jesus does not cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Instead, Jesus is completely composed. Jesus says, it is finished. Jesus is so composed that in the midst of beatings and mockery, he can pause to have theological debates with Pilate. In John, the cross is glory. The cross is radiance. The cross is the beauty of God shining forth from the ugliness of execution. Yes. And if we are not careful, this way of telling the story can paper over the human, literary, theological, and relational pain and struggle and confusion that rumbles around at the foot of the cross. If we are not careful, John's passion narrative can make it all look easy. Nothing seems complicated, confusing, or out of place. Everything unfolds according to a plan. No fewer than 6 times, John tells us that something happened in order to fulfill the Scriptures. This ending was quite literally strict. John's Passion doesn't ask us to linger in Jesus' suffering or to ponder what it would mean for the Word made flesh to die a brutal death. I recently heard an interview with the poet Mary Oliver from back in 2015, and she was asked to describe her spiritual life as a child. She said, I was sent to Sunday school, as many kids are, and then I had trouble with the resurrection, so I would not join the church. But I was still probably more interested than many of the kids who did enter the church. It's been one of the most important interests of my life and continues to be. I can understand why Mary Oliver had trouble with the resurrection. Her gift is to pay close attention to the natural world and then describe it back to the rest of us so that we can see things we might otherwise have missed. And at times this leads to beautiful and hopeful lines and stanzas that can be put on inspirational posters. But at other times, Oliver pays attention to things that are less glorious and less uplifting. One of her poems, What Can We Do About God?, looks straight at death and then straight at God. What can we do about God, who makes and then breaks every God-forsaken beautiful day? What can we do about all those graves in the woods, in old pastures, in small towns, in bellies of cities. God's heavy footsteps through the bracken, through the bog, through the dark wood, his breath like a swollen river, his switch locking the flowers. Forgive me, Lord, how I still sometimes crave understanding. The God of this poem creates beauty and breaks it, causes the flowers to bloom and lops them off all in a day. Every day is made beautiful by God, and every day is broken and God-forsaken. I had trouble with the resurrection. I like her honesty. And as a close observer of the world with all its death and all its endings, she wasn't going to act like resurrection was anything but impossible. Things die and other things are born. The death of one thing feeds the soil of new life. The cycle, this cycle, she observes well and with wonder. But this is not resurrection. This is the perennial cycle of living and dying. It may be that Oliver is right, and we should all have trouble with the resurrection. Maybe our deep familiarity with the Easter story makes it hard for us to find the resurrection startling. Maybe we are not paying enough attention, not looking closely enough at the bogs, the dark wood, the swollen rivers, and all those graves. It may mean that we've made the impossible seem natural, even easy. Oliver is right, I think, at least in this, that God makes breakable beauty. And denying that it is breakable will never get us to the resurrection. That's why I think it's important that we read John's passion alongside Isaiah's description of the suffering servant, whose appearance was so marred even beyond human semblance that he startled the nation. He had no form or majesty. He was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity. He carried our diseases. He was struck down by God and afflicted. He was bruised, slaughtered, crushed with pain. Isaiah does not hold back in his descriptions of the suffering of the righteous one. And in a rich but dangerous hermeneutical move, we read this typologically as a description of the suffering of Jesus. It is rich because it provides an important counterpoint to John's poised and unflappable Jesus. It is dangerous because such typology can serve to wrench a text like Isaiah out of the hands of his Jewish readers, with the implication that this is really about Jesus and nothing else. But there is a way to read this text such that it can maintain its integrity as Hebrew scripture, maintain its ability to describe a moment of deep suffering in Israel's story, and also, when read through a Christian lens, can point to another story, the suffering of another righteous one of Israel. Jesus' passion, when framed by both John and Isaiah, displays the glory and fragility of God, the glory and fragility of the creature. In the stage directions to his play, The Glass Menagerie, Tennessee Williams gives instructions about a recurring musical theme. He says it should be music that, quote, expresses the surface vivacity of life with the underlying strain of immutable and inexpressible sorrow. When you look at a piece of delicately spun glass, he says, you think of two things: how beautiful it is and how easily it can be broken. Both of these ideas should be woven into the recurring theme. When we look at the cross with John and Isaiah, we might come away saying how beautiful it is and how easily it can be broken. The story of the Passion is the story of beauty broken. It is the story of the one who said, I am the life now defeated by death. It is a story of glory, but it is a story of fragile glory. And at least at this point in the Triduum, it is a story of defeated glory. We come into this space today with our own sense of fragility and defeat, our own losses, our own sadnesses, our own worries, and our own anxieties. Some of them are mundane. An assignment coming due, a work task that is stalled and frustrating, kids who think that doing dishes is an unreasonable request. Some, though, are profound. Post-graduation plans, a broken relationship, fears about global crises, questions about calling. All of these we bring to the cross. All of our sufferings, big and small, are welcomed, are not diminished, are not too quickly solved by theological answers, are not smothered by a glory that denies heartbreak. Soon we will pray for people everywhere according to their needs. For the church, for the nations and authorities, for the suffering and afflicted, for those without the hope of faith. We bring all the world's hurts and worries to the cross today. It's not a day to answer them or fix them. It's a day to sit with them and wonder about them and be confused by them. What can we do about God, who makes and then breaks every God-forsaken beautiful day, including perhaps especially this day? We can trust that beneath the brokenness is beauty. We can stand alongside each other as fellow travelers with sufferings that are not unfamiliar to one another. We can dare to pray with Mary Oliver, "Forgive me, Lord, how I still sometimes crave understanding." And we can wait and hope for the impossible resurrection.